Welcome to another edition of Backstage at the Enharmonic. I'm your host, Sean J. Kennedy. Today's guest is percussionist and music industry legend, Jim Catalano. Jim recently retired from Ludwig Drums after a 37-year career. He has lots of great advice for people wanting to get into the music industry and how to stay in the music industry and be successful. He also has some great stories about some of the legends he was able to work with, including Gary Burton and Ringo Starr. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Backstage at the Enharmonic.
Hey, Jim, this is Sean Kennedy.
Hey, Sean, good to hear from you.
Jim, on my podcast, I usually start at the beginning with most of the folks I talk to, how they got involved with music and all that. But before we do that, where are you from?
Well, I'm actually originally from Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is a small town about 40 miles south of Erie, Pennsylvania, off the lake. And grew up there and, went to high school there and everything. Yeah.
And where do you currently reside?
Well, right now, since 1977, when I graduated from Notre Dame, I moved to Goshen, Indiana, which is near Elkhart or very close to South Bend, Indiana. In just a nice little community in the northern part of Indiana, and was close to the Ludwig office. And of course, it's a place I do a lot of gigging from this area in the northern Indiana, southern Michigan area.
So I know you recently just retired from Ludwig. You've been there for how many years were you there, did you say?
Well, I actually started in the music industry in 1978 when I started to work as a percussion product manager for the Premier Drum Company when it was owned by Selmer. And then in 1981, I actually left that job and I went to Slingerland when it was owned by C.G. Kahn. So you notice I just said Selmer and I just said Kahn.
Right.
Those were two separate companies, okay?
Wow.
And then after 2 years as working as the advertising manager for C.G. Kahn, which included Slingerland drums and Deegan mallet instruments, I got an opportunity to go back to the Selmer company because now Selmer owned Ludwig instead of Premier. And so, so I started at Ludwig in 1983 as the marketing manager and stayed there for 36-point-some years. And so
wow,
it was quite a run. It was an incredible run. Very proud of it. When you think about it, I sort of got to be the handoff guy from the Ludwig family to take it into the next generation. And that's sort of what I did. And now, I handed it off to the next guys that are going to take it into the future from here.
Incredible. Me growing up, seeing all the trade magazines and various things, for me, you were the face of Ludwig. And when I finally got to meet you a few years ago and connect with you, it was like meeting a mythical character because I'd only seen you in magazines and that sort of thing. So it was pretty incredible.
Well,
I never told you that.
I think the important thing to know about is that because I was the marketing and sales manager person, I was the person that the public saw. The thing is that there were so many people at the factory level in management and stuff that actually kept everything moving. And I like to give credit to them because without them, there would have been no need to market or to sell anything because they're the ones that kept everything kind of moving. I just happened to be the person that had the gift of gab that could do the interviews and get the TV, not the TV, but the magazines would contact for different statements and things like that. And I was at all the shows because normally that's what a marketing person does. They attend all the shows. And because I was a percussionist, I talked the talk and walked the walk. And so therefore, I kind of was out front, but only as the representative for all the number of, really great craftsmen and people that were behind me that were actually doing all the heavy lifting.
You just said you wrapped up one phase of your career as far as Ludwig goes, but let's go back to the very beginning. What's your earliest recollection of music?
Well, I think my earliest recollection of music was probably Elvis Presley. And I just remember as a kid getting like a little toy guitar or something like that. And I remember dancing in the kitchen in my stocking feet where I could slide to Elvis Presley music. Like, you ain't nothing but a hound dog. But I'll tell you, I know exactly when I sort of got a bug about music. And that was maybe being 5 or 6 years old. all of a sudden I heard the most tremendous sound that just sent chills up and down my spine. And that was, I heard a drum and bugle corps practicing literally in my backyard, because my backyard was against a parking lot for the high school at Meadville High School in Pennsylvania. And the Meadville Thunderbirds came there to practice. And when I heard the brass and the percussion, I just went nuts. I thought that was the most glorious sound I had ever heard. And I would just go down and just be part of that, and I would listen to them. And I even sort of would join in and march alongside them as a little 5- and 6-year-old to the point where I became their mascot after a while. But that's what I remember as being the most impactful kind of thing as far as sparking my real interest in music. But, you know, when it was time to play an instrument, oddly enough, I didn't choose drums. I chose the trumpet. And I think it goes back to that moment, because when I heard those bugles play, I had, you know, associated that with trumpets. And I said, well, I wanted to play the trumpet. And I started trumpet in 4th grade. And it was one of those things where I was getting better. And as I kept going higher in the scale, every time I hit the note F, you know, top line F, I would get a bloody nose.
Oh.
And so, you know, I remember being in concerts and stuff, you know, school concerts. Back then we wore white shirts, you know, all the time. Okay. And I remember, you know, the blood running down my face onto my shirt. I looked like I, you know, had just been in an accident or something. And it was one of those things where the band director and, you know, kind of said, Jim, I think you need to consider another instrument. And so, you know, they suggested the flute, and they suggested violin, because we had orchestra in the band, you know, orchestra in the school at that time. And I said, no, I don't know what I want to do, but I gotta figure it out. And it was around this time that was the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. And I remember that was such a traumatic experience for us people that survived and lived in that era. Okay. And I'll always remember that was in November 22nd, 1963. However, 2.5 months later, February 9th, 1964, that's the date, watching television, the Ed Sullivan Show, where I made up my mind what I wanted to do. And that's, of course, when I saw Ringo playing his Ludwig drums with the Beatles. And I turned to my mom and dad. I said, okay, that's it. That's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a drummer. And, wow, the rest is history. You know, I became a drummer, ended up working for Ludwig and knowing Ringo, and, you know, being part of the team that sort of help build his drum sets over all of these years, you know, from, you know, the time I started working at Ludwig in 1983 until now, we've probably done, you know, a dozen to 15 different kits for Ringo over that time, and just being part of that project. Not that I was building them; there were real crafts with building them, but you were part of the process. Okay.
Wow.
And so it's kind of cool that, you know, that was the thing, you know. And I don't know, I just became just enamored with music of all kinds, you know. So I played the drums. I wanted, and my dad took me to, as I learned to play drums, because they wanted me to take lessons. And I had a really great drum teacher named Cootie Harris, who just passed away about 1.5 years ago. And he was a real jazzer. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I sort of, you know, kind of consider myself a jazz drummer and stuff, is because I was trained by a real jazzer who was from New York City and came to my small town of Meadville, PA to, you know, try a simpler life. And he took on students, and I was one of his students. And I mean, he was, you know, exposing me to deeper jazz than, you know, pop type things. Okay. So that's what was really great. And then I got interested in playing the mallet instruments too. And that was simply from my dad taking me to see Lionel Hampton play. And I got to see a guy who played the vibes, but he also played the drums.
Right.
And, you know, when you're my age, I mean, I'm 65.5 years old right now, you know, born in 1953. But for someone my age, we got to experience the history of rock and roll. You know, from Elvis Presley through the Beatles, through Led Zeppelin, through, through Yes, all of those bands, all of that time, we got to witness it. It was part of our everyday culture. And, I don't know, I just consider myself really blessed that I grew up during that time period. But the time that I had that experience, though, as, experiencing rock and roll, which I played and still play some today, I had my dad, I knew, loved big band jazz. And I remember anytime that Buddy Rich or Louis Bellson was on The Tonight Show starting in 1962, or so, he would always wake me up in the middle of the night and said, hey, you want to come down and see Buddy, or see Louis play? And that was always such a great experience.
You mentioned your dad a couple times so far. Was your dad a musician or just a fan of music?
Just a fan of music. And,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were very close, but he was just, always supported my music and what I wanted to do. Even I'll always remember in 1971 when I graduated from high school and I had to register for the draft, Vietnam was still going on. And my dad was a Navy man, but I remember him saying, son, I want you to do the right thing. And if you get drafted, you're going to have to go. But I want you to practice those drums so that you're the best drummer around so that if you do have to go, you can get in the band. And that was kind of his attitude towards it, even though he was a Navy man from World War II and the Korean War also. So he had he didn't want his son to fight in that war. And
did
so
you ever get called up?
I never did. My ping pong ball lottery number was 86. And I think that year they only called up to like 66 or something like that. And then the war started to dwindle down in 1972. So I never got called. But it was a great incentive to become better and better at music and be a good student in college. That was great incentive to be a good student in college because you knew that if you weren't, there was a real good chance you're going to nom. And so I kind of didn't want to do that.
So when was your first drumming performance experience?
Oh, well, remember I said I was involved with the drum corps, okay? And so when I was 12, maybe 13, I might have been 13, so 1966, I actually joined the Erie Thunderbirds Drum and Bugle Corps. It was called the Meadville Thunderbirds first, and then they moved to Erie later. But I joined the drum corps, and my first year, I was a tenor drummer. And back then, a tenor drummer, that was a single drum without snares, okay? And then you played with hard felt mallets. And so I made the tenor line. And back then, a drum corps would have 3 to 4 tenor drummers and maybe 6 snare drummers. But seeing that line, and all the drums looked the same. So a tenor drum and a snare drum would look exactly the same. Okay, they were all 12 by 15 inch drums, but the tenors just didn't have snares. So I made the tenor line, and I think that was my first time to be doing some big performances in front of big people when I was 12 or 13. But at the same time, I was starting off to learn how to be a drum set player, and I remember doing wedding gigs and gigs at different clubs and things like that. But I'm talking about like social clubs. I'm not talking about nightclubs, okay? I'm talking about there was a club called the Italian Civic Club, and I remember there'd be a wedding or some sort of reception there, and my little band of junior high people would be the band that's playing. And it was the beginnings of Tijuana Brass. Remember Herb Alpert?
Sure,
Tijuana
Herb
Brass?
Alpert, yeah. My dad loved them. He saw them on tour.
Oh, absolutely. And once the trumpet players could play ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then us drummers, we just boom, cha-cha, boom, cha, boom, cha-cha, boom, cha. And it was the kind of parts that were simple enough to try to learn. And so you could play with guys from the band and, that played trumpet and saxophone, and it was great fun.
Yeah, I love Herb. Was one of my early influences because my father was obsessed with him. So we listened to when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, my dad would play the LPs for us. So yeah, Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass, great stuff.
It was great stuff, yeah.
Now, it seems like you had your course set out pretty well from the beginning, but was there any other thing you thought you might have done as a career when you were coming up, or was it always just music for you?
Well, I think from a very early age, I always knew that I wanted to be an entertainer. I always knew I wanted to go into music. And So that was something that was always part of my goal. But I was also interested in like politics and history and social studies types of things. Okay. I was interested in sciencey things too, because, the Mercury and astronaut in the Gemini programs and Apollo. Mm-hmm. And I was interested in all that stuff. But once I realized that you needed a lot of heavy math skills for those things, it was sort of like, okay, that's not going to be me. Okay. And so I went more the social studies route. So I would say if I did not go into music, I probably would have been like a social studies teacher. That's probably what I would have done. I remember when I was a senior in high school and I was the drum captain and, kind of the top player. And I'll always remember the band director, Mr. Paul McCandless, whose son is Paul McCandless Jr., who is a very famous jazz oboe player and a soprano sax player who played with Dave Samuels a lot. And, I mean, he's still out there playing today. Well, anyways, his father, my band director, he looked at me one day on the practice field at marching band, in like September of my senior year, and he said, "So Jim, what are you going to be doing next year?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm going to go to Edinburgh University, back down to Edinburgh College, and I'm going to study history and social studies." And he just sort of looked at me, kind of smirked on his face, and he said, "No, you're not. No. He said, you're going to be going to music school. You're going to music school. You're going to be a band director." And that was I didn't even know you could do that. You know what I mean? And I remember going home and telling my parents and say, "Yeah, Mr. McCandless, he thinks that I should go into music and should be a band director." And they said, "Well, you can do that?" And I said, well, obviously, that's what band directors have to go to college to get a degree. And so it was there that I first got the idea in my head that I was going to go to college to learn to be a music educator and better player. But it wasn't until my senior year. And then I just sort of worked it from there, to do that. I was scared to death at first, of course, until I realized that I could do it. I had the skill sets. I think when you're a percussionist also, and you don't have the melodic training that percussionists do today. But in that era, percussionists didn't have the melodic and harmonic training. And so I had a lot of catching up to do to get into the right programs. Eventually, I went to school at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I studied with Gary Olmsted. And I also studied with another gentleman who was there part-time during a sabbatical from Mr. Olmsted named Scott Previs. And the importance of that, it's Prebys. The importance of that is that he was the guy that first introduced me to lead sheets and playing vibes and playing jazz from lead sheets. I never really understood that. To me, jazz was a big band. Okay, that was pretty much all it was. Or if it was a combo, it was, I didn't understand where that music all came from. But then when I was in college, that's when I finally understood it. And that was a great revelation for me. And it's one of the things that I still do today. I mean, I play all the time, to lead sheets. In fact, I have gigs coming up on Vibes with just myself and my iReal Pro app playing, real book stuff, where I got, fake piano, bass, and drums. Hey, when the money's low and you don't get, you don't have a lot of money for a small gig like a reception or something, the mothers of invention, you go and you find ways to still be out there playing, making music. And if you can use technology to help you do that, so be it. Otherwise, a singer-songwriter guitar player is going to get the gig. And so now I can get the gig as a Vibes player, and I still have piano, bass, and drums behind me.
Yep, that's great.
It's been, quite a cool thing. But yeah, I never really dreamed of having a career in music. That was something that, as far as on the instrument side of things, I always thought it would be on the performance and teaching side of things. Okay. And the part that I think I'm most proud of in my, we'll call it overall career, is that during the time that I worked the business world from 1978 until just recently, I never gave up playing. I kept progressing, I kept getting better, and I kept, I evolved as a vibes player, as a drummer, as a symphonic percussionist, etc. Maybe it's not at the same levels as what I maybe would want to. However, good enough to keep playing and to always get a gig. I mean, like, for example, I don't have a gig tonight, but I did last night. I just did, 3 nights of doing a musical called Next to Normal, which is a rock and roll musical, and I'm doing it again next weekend. But starting on Thursday of this week, I have a gig every single night for 2 weeks in a row.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That's what retirement is for me. I mean, retirement for me is being out there playing music. And then starting in late August, I will be teaching at Notre Dame again and at St. Mary's College. Don't know how many students I will have, because when you're an adjunct instructor, you don't really know what you're going to have until registration is done. But, I'm looking forward to it, and it's always a challenge. I mean, one student just emailed me today and says, I'm thinking of signing up for percussion classes. However, I only want to know about Latin percussion. Can you teach me about Latin percussion? Well, that's a tough one for me. I have all the equipment. I sort of know how to play it, but I also know the real cats that really know how to play it. And I know that's not
what
me.
you don't know.
Okay. That's exactly right. And so I had to probe with the student to see just sort of where they're at. And look, I can get you to a certain level. I can teach you the basics, and then, maybe to a middle level of playing the timbales and bongos and conga and djembe and cajon and things of that nature. And we'll do a lot of music. I'll bring in a lot of music that we can play along to get the feels and things like that, and all the different types of rhythms. But when it comes to, I can only get you to a certain level. I can't get you to that next level. Okay. Which, because, you gotta really know what you're doing there. I have a saying, for what I lack in talent and technique and Latin percussion, I make up in equipment. I got the stuff,
That's great.
But, as a result of that, I keep getting gigs, playing hand percussion, where, I'm not a real cat in hand percussion, but yet I have the stuff. And so people will call me because they know I got the stuff.
Right. So was there a pivotal moment early in your career when you were performing somewhere and you're like, yes, I've made the right decision, and, you knew you were headed in the right direction?
That was probably very early in my career, and I think it was when I was in the Erie Thunderbirds or Meadville Thunderbirds. I don't know which name they had at the time, where we won the state championship of Pennsylvania. And I remember the euphoria that I felt from that. And just, the performance level of how we were getting so tight. Now, by today's standards, it was probably pretty bad, okay? Because today the drum corps stuff is nuts good, okay? However, for that era of music, it was sort of like, that's when I knew that, this is what I want to do. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be a drum corps guy, and I was in drum corps for a long time, and I wrote a lot of corps style percussion for high school bands, and so I thought that was going to be it. But I also was lucky enough that my parents encouraged me to always do a big variety of music. And so I played in big bands. I had my own high school rock bands. And so, but I think winning that state championship and being in front of thousands of people, yes, at the time there would be thousands of people. Smaller shows like that today wouldn't draw very much, I'm sure. But back in that era, it was a big deal, and so I think that's pretty much, was when I knew, this is what I want to do.
Is there one musician over the course of your career as a performer or in the business end of it that you really, really cherish that opportunity to work with said performer? I'm sure you could list 10, but is there one or two that you really look back on and go, wow, I got to work with such and such? Well,
sure. This is real simple for me. In the vibes area, Gary Burton, period. I mean, it was just, just a great guy, great educator. He's the Mozart. He's the Mozart of the vibraphone. Okay.
Yep.
And I think that was one of those things where, where I just, really admired what he could do on that instrument. Still do today. I tease him whenever I talk to him that I have every single recording, even the bootleg recordings of that he has done in his career, and he thinks that I actually may have more recordings of him than he does. You know, and so I'd say, you know, definitely Gary Burton, and you know, and I work with so many drummers too over the years, but I'd say the one drummer that I kind of attached myself to, I think the most, who's still going strong today, is Butch Miles. As a jazz drummer and a big band drummer, I mean, he did everything that Buddy and Louie and Ed Shaughnessy did, and of course Ed and I were very close. We were really good friends. But I think from a longevity standpoint of, you know, meeting Butch, you know, long ago, and that he's still going strong today. He was just at the Elkhart Jazz Festival, and I just consider him a great friend, but I still consider him a great influence on how I want to play the drums. I still aspire to be able to play the drums like Butch. And, you know, and I think that's good.
Great.
And now I aspire to play like Jeff Hamilton too. I mean, you know, if I had to pick my favorite combo drummer, it's definitely Jeff Hamilton or Peter Erskine. I mean, I just love how they shade and color everything they do on the drum set. But yeah, there's so many that are just so impactful. But
sure,
you know, and yeah, and of course, you know, you always have to give credit back to Ringo. That's what got me started. And you know, and I've met him several times and go to a lot of the Ringo All-Star concerts, and it's still quite a thing. I mean, I'm very proud of my 1 or 2 pictures I have with myself and Ringo. It's just like, you know, like, holy cow, I can't believe I got to meet this guy and be associated with him for all these years that started me down the path of wanting to be a drummer.
Ringo, I assume, if you walked into a room, would know that you're Jim and say, "Hi, Jim." That must be like crazy that a Beatle, especially Ringo, knows who you are.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that though, because I don't really know that for exact. He probably would know who I am, yes, and we probably met maybe 5 or 6 times over my career. Okay, however, we're not like, you know, acquaintances, friends type acquaintances. Okay,
sure,
I connect more with his drum tech, Jeff Chonis. Okay, and then when you have time with Ringo, it's very, very, very short. I had one time with him where I got to sit with him at catering and stuff, and you know, and that was really, really great. But that was, you know, 20 some years ago. I would say the rules of engagement with Ringo are when you are, you don't engage Ringo, he engages you if he wants to. Okay, and then I'm not saying that in a mean way on his side.
No, right.
It's just that he's Ringo and he needs his privacy. And so he can't have people, especially industry people, kind of, you know, like going all over him there and stuff, you know. So I always learned to keep my distance and to be very professional. And if he wanted to talk to me, then, you know, Jeff Chonis would bring him over to talk to me. And that's the way I always left it.
Wow, what a great experience. Incredible. I know you play in concert bands, jazz band, musicals, but if I said, listen, Jim, you have one gig, what do you want to play? What would it be?
Well, probably one gig. It would probably be big band. I mean, you know, being a drummer in a big band, that, you know, and playing count bassy music. That would be that's my ultimate. I mean, I love all of the bassy charts. I've kind of internalized all of that music. That's one of the reasons why I probably, you know, like the way Butch Miles plays, because he, you know, for, you know, 15, 16 years, he was the bassy drummer, you know, and so, you know, I would say that would be my ultimate, is to be you know, in the bassy band or play that type of music. You know, when it comes to symphonic music, I mean, you know, playing symphonies of Shostakovich or anything like that, I mean, those things just capture me and stuff. You know, but when it comes to combo work, I mean, Clifford Brown, you know, Joy Springs, my favorite jazz tune. My granddaughter asked me the other day, you know, he said, you know, Grandpa, Poppy, she calls me, what's your favorite jazz tune? And I said, oh, well, it's Joy Springs by Clifford Brown. And she said that because she was doing a Facebook story on me, and then she got the music off the internet and put it out there on me and stuff, you know. So, but those are, you know, the kinds of things that I love. And, you know, I love being a combo vibes player. And I have a saying on Vibes that, I'm still evolving, still getting better at 65 and a half years old. I call myself a work in progress, just running out of time.
Have there been any specific challenges or problems in the music industry, or any advice you'd give to young people wanting to go into it?
When I give talks at colleges, I always talk about similar things. And people will ask me, and they say, wow, Mr. Catalano, you were the marketing manager for Ludwig for all those years. And, do you have any advice of, how did you do it? And I said, well, first of all, I was in the right place at the right time. And that's just the truth. Okay. Mm-hmm. In other words, I just happened to be at the right place, met with the right people to get the gig. But I have a saying, I went to Notre Dame. I got a graduate assistantship, a full ride to Notre Dame for grad school. I was lucky to go to Notre Dame, but I wasn't lucky to graduate. I had to do something. And likewise, to get an opportunity to work in the music industry, yes, I was very lucky to get an opportunity. But to stay in it for 41 years, well, that took a little bit more than luck. Okay. But I always tell kids the same thing, or college kids, I would say. I say, there's the three most important things that you can do to prepare yourself for a career in the music industry. And they're waiting. And I say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. What? And I say, well, reading. I said, you got to be able to comprehend. Writing. You got to be able to, communicate both verbally and written, and arithmetic. You got to be able to handle numbers. And I say, you don't need to handle complex numbers. I was terrible at fractions in school, and I don't even know how to spell calculus, but I knew how to run a business. I knew how to do business math. And, and I knew the differences between, expenses and, top line revenue and things like that, and EBITDA. And so once I understood the basics of business, and then I was able to run a successful division of a business for a long time. I always talk about something else, though, is that when you go to a job, when you go to anything, there's kind of four things you got to bring with you to be successful. Number one is you got to have technical competence, no matter what you're doing. I mean, whether it's in music or in reading, writing, arithmetic, in managing a business, whatever, in doing computers, you got to have technical competence. Number two is you have to have the ability to fit in. In other words, if you go to a place and you think you're all superior and stuff, you're not going to fit in very well. But likewise, if you go in and you're all woe is me and, I don't think I can get this, well, you're not going to fit in very well. So you have to find a balance to fit in. I always tell people, too, that, for me, when I was just starting in the music industry, I was a young guy working in an industry with much older people. I had to fit in with that. But at the tail end of my industry experience before I retired, it was the exact opposite of that. Now I'm the old man, and now I'm working with a lot of 20 and early 30-year-olds, and I have to fit in with them. They kept me young. I mean, I learned from them. I learned more about social media. I learned more about computers and stuff, and I, embraced that. So fitting in. Then the third thing, I call it be flexible. And what I mean by that is you're going to constantly see nothing but change throughout everything that you experience in your career and in life in general. I mean, when I started in the music industry in 1978, there were basically 6 drum companies, okay? Today, there's like 160 drum companies total because some only make steel drums, some only do Latin percussion, etc. But there's so much more diversity and variety. Things have split up so much. And so you have to be flexible. The other thing is that people are changing jobs fast. For example, even myself, in my past 36 years working at Ludwig, I had 34 bosses. Wow. And so each time you have a change like that, you have to go with that flow. And sometimes your changes can be polar opposite changes. So in other words, you're going, one direction, and you're going, with the next boss, you're going 180 degrees the other way. And then when they're gone, now you're going back 180 degrees the other way again. And so that's what I mean about be flexible. You got to accept change and adapt and go with it. And I can tell you this, that the amount of change I experienced in the early part of my career was nothing compared to the end of my career. In other words, the change quotient continued to expand and expand. Change happening faster, 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 more multiple changes over and over and over again, and to a place where your mind starts spinning. And so you just have to know that that things are going to change, and you got to change and adapt with it. Then the fourth thing I always tell people is this, and it's something that hopefully I'm known for, and that is you got to have passion for what you do. And then I go and I say, look at me, passion for what you do, even when you don't, even when you don't. What that means is simply not every decision you're going to like. Not every directional thing that you have to do in your life or your career is something that you are going to agree with. However, you're being paid to do a job, and you got to go with it. And you got to have passion for what you're doing, even when you don't. So in other words, no matter what you might think inside, your outside presentation has to be one of passion. And those are the things that will keep people working and keep you, in a job for a long period of time. And I think for me, though, working in the business world was one thing, but without continuing to be an active performing musician and a clinician, because I've done clinics at TMEA and Midwest and American Band College and all sorts of different places. By keeping my foot in the fire there, it gave me more credibility. And so, I talk about talking the talk and walking the walk. In a way, I had that ability to do that because when I would talk about the vibraphone, I could sit down and I could show somebody what I was talking about. And then I could go over, even though I don't consider myself a great timpanist, when I would try to explain something on timpani, I could play what I'm trying to explain. One day, one of the many Selmer owners or, top people over the years, they said, "So Jim, just what do you bring to this job as the percussion person?" And I said, "Well, you see these two catalogs here? Yeah. This one has all the drum set stuff in it. And this one has all the mallet percussion and timpani and et cetera. Yeah." I said, "Well, I can professionally play every single instrument that's in this catalog. That's what I bring to the job. And I can talk about it." And so, those are just some important things to me.
Well, that's all great advice. Yeah. And it segues right into my next question. You were talking a lot about passion. Is there anything outside of the music world that you're passionate about and like to invest time in?
Well, first of all, I'm very close to my family. Okay, so my family, my wife, and my kids, and my grandchildren now. So that's a very important part of my life. I'm also very involved in church, and I play in the praise team at church, and so that's something that I love to do. But now that I'm retired, I am trying to take better care of my health. Every morning, I try to get up and I go out and I ride my bike for anywhere from 10 to 15 miles, sometimes 20. And
it's great.
During the good weather, of course, and when it gets into winter, then I have my elliptical that I'll transition to. But I'm trying to to get more involved in that. That's something I'm very passionate about. And I don't know, I just love reading about history and things like that. Why things happen, what makes things work. I'm that guy that if I have any free time to watch TV, I'd much rather watch PBS than anything else.
Oh yeah.
And so definitely. That's just kind of, where I come from.
That's great. So if any of the listeners want to connect with you or find out what projects you're involved with, what bands you're playing with, where could they go online to connect with you?
My Facebook page.
That's great. And when I post this podcast, I'll have a direct link to your Facebook page so people can connect with you there.
Okay.
So, Jim, over the last couple of years, it's been a pleasure getting to know you and connecting with you. And now I follow you on Facebook, and I've got to hang out with you at the NAMM show a few times. And I can't thank you enough for taking time to share your stories and advice with all the listeners to the podcast. And I hope your gigs are often and many in the future.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
All right, Jim. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Goodbye.
To find out more about Jim or to get in contact with him, please follow the link included with this podcast to his Facebook page. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Backstage at the Enharmonic. Thanks for listening.